All right. Got it.
Wonderful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Not a huge audience at the moment, but maybe we'll get some more joining and hopefully we'll get some watching online afterwards as well. But really delighted to welcome Martin Birch to our webinar tonight. And before we kick off, I'd like to do a quick acknowledgement of country. I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet electronically today. I'm on Ngunnawal country and I pay my respects to the elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here and in our community. So thank you very much everyone for that. As I mentioned, we are really, really lucky to have Martin here from Omnisure to talk to us today. And I know, Martin, you've done a lot of preparation for this particular webinar, and I'm really, really grateful for your time. So thank you so much. I really will be delighted to hear what you have to say. So please.
Good. Thanks, everybody, and welcome. My name is Martin Birch, and I'm going to start off with a quick overview of the agenda. Just going to spend a few short minutes on an intro to myself and Omnisure. I've catered for 2 and 13 minutes to look at some topics from our survey that we sent out. They are firstly in property insurance, which covers cover types and basis of settlement. Going to have a look at first-party and third-party insurance and risk management, and that'll take us 15 minutes, and then we've got a Q&A. And then we're going to have a look at some cyber liability, what it's designed for, how does the policy respond, and what protection does it give me, and then some more time for Q&A after that. I'm not going to spend too much time. General advice warning as prescribed under financial services. Now an intro. The main points from the slide really, in a nutshell, that I'd like you to note is that in addition to being in general insurance, I've got a farming background, so that's mainly livestock. Sheep, goats, dairy, and beef cattle, mainly stud breeding. And I have a special interest in animal health, nutrition, and disease. I did some electives such as veterinary science in my bachelor's. And insurance, I've got underwriting, claims, policy wording, dispute and arbitration experience, and co-founded an agricultural underwriting agency and a farmers mutual fund. So I work closely with reinsurance companies, Munich Re and Reinsurance, and I have a few qualifications in the space. So I think there's a reasonable fit for talking to the Protein Association. I am interested generally in what's going on. I thought the next slide is very briefly, it's just if anyone is interested in ESG, which is a huge topic, but in particular the nexus with ag and the legal obligations, directors and officers' obligations according to current law and what's happening with climate change, and in particular reporting obligations. I spent a lot of time, 4 months, preparing this. It's a fairly comprehensive document. It's a resource. Please contact me. I can actually send you a hard copy, although you can have a quick look at the link at the bottom. In particular, chapter 13 is all about agricultural investment fund managers. So why do those types of cover and basis of settlement in the first party, third party issues matter? Well, because it affects the price you pay, how much money you'll get paid, and who gets paid. So I think that's sufficient reason to have a quick look at this. So we're in the first half of the webinar. What is, So I want to start by considering 3 claim examples, just to introduce some curiosity and perhaps pique the interest of some participants. And the first scenario is, let's just say, and by the way, I'm assuming that most people have an ag background or are on hobby farms or farms. I know there are some that are processing food, maybe in a sort of industrial estate and so on. But my assumption is that people are generally sort of ag and farm pack sort of base. So scenario number 1, let's just say you've got an old shed that you want to insure. The roof is rusty and in poor condition. The wooden poles just as a support structure. There's no floor, just an earthy natural soil. It's worth maximum 12 grand, but you insure this to your broker for 50,000. So you get the schedule back from your broker, and you have a look at the policy schedule, and it says barn, top paddock, just for some description. Sum insured 50k, excess 500, cover type is defined events. The base of settlement is indemnity. Yep, that all looks okay. What is your expectation if a claim occurs? So this obviously is an example of a property damage claim. And the next two examples would be liability. But what is your expectation having regard to what I've just read out, the sum insured and so on, and the basis of settlement? So scenario 2 is, let's assume on a farm, your 13-year-old daughter comes back from boarding school, brings 2 friends with them, and they ask mum if they can go for a ride in the back paddock. So mum says, gives them firm instructions to her daughter, only you drive, take care, and you don't go fast, and so on, blah, blah, blah. So guess what happens? The 13-year-old boy, halfway down the track, says, oh, I want to have a go. And after a bit of debate, he takes the wheel, and what does a 13-year-old boy do? After driving around, he says, oh, let's go faster. He rolls the ATV, and the other friend is a girl, 13-year-old girl as well, is pinned under the all-terrain vehicle. They can't lift it up, and she's taken. So what do you think will happen? What is your expectation? Where is this covered? It's a rhetorical question, right? But just apply your mind. And the third scenario is, again, your 12-year-old son brings a mate from boarding school to the farm. They're out having some fun, and they're riding their bikes on a tennis court at the main homestead. And the young visitor is taking a corner around the tennis net pole. They've got that metal bar that you wind up the net there, and he slips there on his bike, and his eye is gouged out. What do you think is the situation in terms of liability, and how does that relate to, this experience that we're going through now? So turning to the first topic, first party and third party. Just to understand the policies and the terminology, first party relates to insurance cover where there are 2 parties to the insurance contract, the insurance company and you, the insured, for whom the contract is designed and is intended to, or is written to protect. The second party is the insurer. So that's quite simple, but you won't hear that term in the insurance landscape in Australia. It's basically first party, and then for insurance, and then you've got the other bucket, the other kinds or class of insurance, which is called the third party insurance. So this is designed to protect you against liability for either property damage or personal injury to someone else, a third party. They are strangers to the insurance contract. They're neither the insured person, they're not the insurer, they're someone else that comes out of left field. This insurance, this class of insurance, has the potential to, for huge claims. I'm happy to talk about it later. For example, horse riding, personal injury claim for a 16-year-old schoolgirl on a small holding. We're looking at $20 million as a payout. It'll sink most people, I think, on the webinar, and most insurer farmers in Australia. The policy responds, these third-party policies responds to your legal liability for the harm caused. Liability and legal liability are 2 different things. I'm talking now in the context of a public liability policy or product liability policy for that matter. It's all about a wrong. English law in Australia, it talks about torts are a wrong that you do to someone else. And this fancy word, it's quite apt though, is a tortious liability. It sounds a bit like a tortoise, but it's a critical ingredient of proving negligence as a foundation. That's why they say legal liability, you need to prove negligence in this, whereas civil liability does not necessarily include that element of negligence. So as I mentioned, I was talking about public liability, and when it boils down to an accident, it's your insurance company's claims department that is, in the first instance, just going to take control, because the first thing is they've got to review the policy wording and the incident that's occurred, and they've got to decide to grant indemnity to you. That's the first part of a liability claim. They've got to grant indemnity, your insurer. What they do is basically they assess whether the claim falls within the terms of the covering clause. The second part is to accept liability. What they're doing on your behalf is just saying, yeah, in our experience, we think that a judge will find you legally liable. And in that instance, they say, we are now going to negotiate the settlement. I can talk more about the claims processes later. Other examples of third-party policies are things like professional indemnity and management liability policies. And some liability policies have both first-party and third-party covers, and one of them is cyber liability, by way of an example, of which we're going to spend a bit of time on later. So these things are quite relevant because they decide who's going to get paid money. That in a liability policy, you don't get any money. The claim is negotiated and the settlement is paid to the claimant. Cover types. You get two in property damage insurance: accidental damage and defined events. Accidental damage says, basically in a nutshell, says this: everything is covered unless we say it's excluded. That's in the policy wording, and the premium is more expensive. The defined events turns that on its head as a cover type. It says nothing is covered until it's a listed event or defined event. So the premium rates are generally cheaper, and so is the onus of proof. It's another reason why just understanding these cover types is highly relevant, because if you want to claim for a tractor or a shed or something on your farm, you as the insured have to prove merely that there is physical damage. The insurance company has to prove that the cause of that damage is excluded, otherwise your claim is going to be accepted. But if your shed has, you've chosen a defined events policy, then you have to prove not only that the damage was caused by a covered event. So the onus of proof shifts and has quite a big bearing when you have a claim. Before turning to the basis of settlement, which I think as a concept is more important in understanding because it determines how you get paid out, I just want to have one slide on what an example looks like in a farm pack policy. I've got the slide which basically shows how the farm property section has been extrapolated out into a table and summarizes the covers that you can get. So if we let's look at farm buildings. You've got all options available. You can select either accidental damage or defined events, or listed events as it's sometimes called. And you can select either indemnity or reinstatement as a basis of settlement. But if you have a look at, let's say, fencing, you can't choose them all. Sometimes the policy actually prescribes what the cover is. But this is set out here just to show you that all across the farm property section, you've got these choices of cover and a basis of settlement options. And what you do and what you choose here impacts the cost, how much you get paid, and is hugely relevant to the point end of the insurance value chain. So this is the basis of settlement. As I mentioned before, I gave some examples of insurance claims where you've got an old shed. You've insured for an old shed worth $12,000, you've insured for $50,000. You check it through the basis of settlement indemnity, it all looks good, right? So then a total loss occurs. And what is your expectation? Until now, we've been speaking about the quotation part of the value chain. But now we're looking at claims. What happens when a claim occurs? How are you going to be indemnified? I think it's important to point out that there is a principal insurance. It's called betterment, and it basically says insurance is there to protect, put you back into a position that you were before a loss, not into a better position. So how does reinstatement, the basis of settlement, impact you? If you've got reinstatement on your policy schedule, basically the clause will tell you whether you enjoy reinstatement as new for the claims adjustment process, or whether you'll enjoy reinstatement using the best available alternative. But this is the best kind of cover type you can choose. And the most important point to realize is that with this kind of loss assessment, the loss adjuster does not apply depreciation, so that the condition of the building just before the loss is not taken into account. However, with indemnity basis of settlement, if that appears on your policy schedule, the insurer's obligations are such that the loss is assessed using taking into account depreciation. In other words, they focus on the condition of the property just before the loss happened, and the obligation is to indemnify you for the property in that condition and no better than that. So they will take into account wear and tear. This is the pointy end, and if the unsuspecting person, the insured, doesn't know this, there's going to be a clash of expectations. So against all of this backdrop, it's obvious that choosing a sum insured is important. So, insuring something for $2 million and there's a total loss, and indemnity basis settlement applies, you may not get paid out $2 million, and that's where problems arise. So the fourth topic is risk management plan. And what I wanted to point is that I think insurance brokers are going to be moving more towards a risk advisory role, and to be giving advice on risk management and so on, because this occurs already at the big end of town. So this advice and these value add actually exist, and it's going to come down into the SME space, small to medium enterprise, the SME space. And what that basically means is that you have to document certain risk policies and your procedures, and develop a risk culture and document them. And ultimately, for startups, investors, it might be more attractive for investors. Bank lenders will look more favorably upon it. Underwriters have a look and think this is an operation is a good risk, so interest rate will be low, your premium rates for insurance will be later. And I might be interested in discussing with, say, one member of the association, if they're interested in taking this forward and perhaps working with someone to start working through a risk management plan and ultimately an enterprise risk policy. We've got 10 minutes for Q&A now, and I sent through I'm not sure if you're ready for some questions now, or to open the floor, Alison.
Yeah, I did get your questions, Martin. Thank you so much for that brief summary. I particularly was interested in the risk management plan idea and your thoughts on the fact that could actually help you get insurance and potentially reduce your indemnity. I've got to say, some of the examples you used were a little grim. The poor kid with no eye anymore. But your point.
Well, I must just I think I did mention that these are all live examples in a farming portfolio. And so people think that these things can't happen. They do. And and interestingly enough, the other thing is that I can actually talk to them, and to give you some legal, take you through the claims process as well. So that's why I've used it.
No, it's wonderful. We've only got one other person online at the moment. And so, Adam, if you do have any specific questions, you're so welcome to speak up. If not, I've got a few prepared, and I'm happy to just ask one or two to get the most out of this section.
Yeah, Alison, can I ask you?
I'll jump in if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, okay.
Martin, when you talk about like risk culture, risk management, are you talking about risk in terms of risks to employees or people coming into the business or the work site, or are you talking about like risk in terms of consumers, like similar to kind of what Duncan's talked about previously with regards to making sure there's no diseases and those sort of things, or if there's any bacteria outbreaks in the product that you're making?
Yeah, I am definitely speaking about the risk culture and the level of risk maturity in the operating business itself. Those processes and protocols that are documented, that are having been thought about ahead of time and that have been planned. It includes things like risk surveys, some documenting the your process, your manufacturing process, or the farming practice, so we try and improve, the plan, the risk management plan, if something untoward happens quickly. And for example, a cyber event. If you get to work on a Monday morning and there's an email and saying that your systems have been hacked, or your information's been taken, exfiltrated, what do? What's the first port of call? You've got a lot of these pathogens. Is the sterilization process that you have in place sufficient? Is it actually working? I mean, I don't know how you test that, but it's thinking about those kind of things. Whenever you're involved with food and feed for livestock, there's pretty stringent legislation in place. Now, does the association or members have one document that includes all the laws and regulations that apply to the manufacture of food in one place that they can reference, and then put into writing what processes they've got in order to comply with all of those laws? Are there inspectors that come on site and so on? I think the Feed Manufacturing Association, with whom you guys seem to, I think your CEO is a member of Feed Manufacturing Association. Now, well, that's an excellent. I mean, I can only allocate so much time to this opportunity to talk to you. But I had a look at one of the Zoom sessions, and when he spoke, and then I got onto their website, and that's a perfect symbiosis. To piggyback on that, they're a mature risk organization. They're big. They've got partnerships. So you've got that. So that's great. That's exactly what you've got to do. And the next phase is to start pulling that resource. What will they share with you guys? What resources will they make available? And you start documenting all of those and putting that into policies and procedures. So I think that's a great start. But you need manpower, right? I suppose someone's got to do all that work.
And Adam, is that sort of what you were getting at in your question?
Yeah, pretty much. Like what sort of cover would you look towards, to mitigate, probably the two things. One is diseases that kind of hurt your stock, or breeding failures, and then the risk side of things with regards to any potential infections that may be passed on in that sort of food production process.
Yeah, right. So I guess that's the two different parts of the discussions. Like risk management on one side is everything that I've just discussed about risk management. The other side is insurance. And then what can you transfer? What risks can you transfer? Like you've mentioned, diseases. Now, in the farm pack setting, the covers that you get are for perils such as fire, impact damage. Diseases is a specialized cover, and you won't find that in a farm pack anywhere in Australia. And that will require, there are some very few, but there are insurance covers for disease outbreaks. But there will be pretty hefty exclusions in there for the very big exposures, such as foot and mouth. We had a rabies outbreak on our farm in South Africa, which was massive. you won't get cover for that kind of stuff. But if something breaks out in the herd and you lose cattle there, yeah, you can get that kind of cover. Happy to take that further, but I suspect that.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I suspect that. I mean, I don't know if some members are livestock farmers and do this on this, you know, starting up an insect protein business on the side. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a grim reality by the sounds of things, Martin, that, you know, is there another way to fix that though? Like, can you, so they won't insure you against disease outbreak, but what about income protection? Like, will that cover you if you have something wrong with your farm such that you can't produce?
Yeah.
Income protection for that.
Yeah, business interruption. Yeah, absolutely. Business interruption. That's a huge component.
Yeah, back recording. Please continue.
Fantastic. Where there's a will, there's a way. All righty. So I'm not 100% certain where we ended. I know I was talking about risk management, and we have generally, I think we've covered this risk management part, because did I get to the point where I was saying that these policies and procedures should attract, right, great stuff. So then we're basically at the next part anyway, the first half of the webinar, which is some types of liability insurance. And the ones that I think are very important, or should be able to look at by the RPM members, are the ones that I've got on the screen. And I mentioned 2 liability claims examples: the tennis court and the all-terrain vehicle rollover. So you can bear that in mind as we progress. So the first one is personal legal liability. And basically, I think the first thing I just want to say, against the backdrop of those 2 claims I've just mentioned, that the public liability section of the Farm Pack product doesn't give you any protection for your personal legal liability. It's excluded in the Farm Pack liability section, and most people would be aghast when they hear that. So, yeah, a farmer wears 2 hats on his farm. So if you're taking your kids to the local school in the morning, those activities are being conducted in your personal and private capacity, wearing your personal hat. But when you're doing farm work, with say your dairy cows and the local vet is doing AI or something, and that interaction with the vet and the work you're doing is you're wearing your farming business hat. So there's 1 person, 2 hats, 2 different exposures, 2 different liabilities, and they're insured in 2 different places. Private liability or personal legal liability appears in the home and contents section. And that home and contents section, I highly recommend that you take out both covers. Even if you only have a kettle in the house to insure, take out both covers. Why do I say that? So another little claim example. So, you know, if you or your wife goes to town on a rainy Saturday morning to buy food for the home for the next 2 weeks, and whilst walking across the pedestrian path, perhaps with your mind on something else, your umbrella pokes the eye out of a young child crossing the pedestrian crossing, then you have 0 cover for that, unless you took out contents cover for that kettle, and you've got $20 million cover. It's hugely important. The younger the person is who suffers an injury that has a long work career ahead and studying and all that, the bigger the compensation. So, like, say for example, a swimming pool accident on the farm, that would be covered if you insure the building, because a pool and an outbuilding is included in the definition of a building. So if accident arises out of the ownership or occupancy of a building, then the legal liability will cover that part as well. But if you only insure your house and not the contents, You may not have any cover if your house dog bites someone at the front door. So these little bits and pieces are hugely important. Obviously, every liability claim in particular is complex in terms of the facts. But the point is that the liability cover is insured differently. One, for the liability arising out of the ownership or occupation of the home building, and a different one for the liability arising in circumstances other than the ownership of a building. So that's fairly broad and extends to cover away from the home, and could include cover for worldwide travel, not only Australia, but when you're traveling in the USA and you poke the eye out of someone on a pedestrian's crossing. These little bits of information are hugely important. And it all turns on if you take up contents cover. So as is a pool, a tennis court, for example, is part of of an outbuilding, or will be covered, but the tennis net may not be. That's contents, right? So it depends how the injury occurs. So employer's liability is obviously very important. Workers' compensation is mandatory, and note that your employees are excluded in the public liability section. Another insurance policy I think that is worthwhile looking at is professional liability, because at the margin between public liability and professional liability, there's a bit of a grey area. Sometimes there's a bit of interplay there, and the difference matters if you're actually caught. I'll talk more about that, the public liability policy and PI a bit later. Again, public liability excludes liability of personal capacity, and that can become quite testy when a farmer or the operator of the business is not incorporated. As I said, you wear two hats on the farm, once in your personal private capacity and others in your business capacity. And the cover you get, the activities that you were doing at the time that an injury occurred matters a lot. Product liability is obviously usually important for the IPA members, and I'll talk about that. There's also a really interesting discussion that could be had about unregistered motor vehicles, either on a manufacturing plant on an estate, industrial estate, like a forklift. They're on farms and in those estates. Where would that cover vest? Or do you have cover? I've had claims that, and it's a hugely consequential event on a farm. So I want to chat about, as promised, public and product liability a bit more. The analysis that you see on the screen, or as I'm going to speak about, is really just a standard form of policy, to the extent that exists, because the public liability wording can be modified by extensions, inclusion extensions, and special conditions. That having been said, I think a really important thing to remember is that liability insurance is there to protect, as contrasted with professional indemnity, is there to protect the insured from certain types of wrongs. Like in English law, it's called a tort, and hence the term tortious liability, which sounds like a tortoise, but it's very succinct because it means a wrong in the eyes of the law, something that you do, injury you cause to another person or property damage, is what's covered in public liability is a tort, and that's an actionable wrong, an action meaning legal action. So something that you've done and someone that can sue you for that falls within the ambit of public liability. So what is public liability? As contrasted with professional indemnity on the right-hand side, it is claims made against you by others. I've highlighted the word others. Under PI, you'll see it's claims made against you by a client. I don't intend to contrast in the same way going through, but just to highlight that point. Claims are made against you by others, and others means the public, right? It's public liability. But that can include people that you do business with. It's anyone out there other than a professional client. And it's for personal injury and death or property damage caused by the insured's business, not for you in your personal capacity out of your farming business. So a tip on some of the exclusions: each section of a farm package product contains exclusions for all other covers, the covers that occur elsewhere in another section. So if you're cherry picking covers in a package policy, it needs to be done by someone with experience in the product, because if you think you've got public liability cover or personal legal liability cover, and you don't take out the home section, you don't have that cover because it's excluded in the public liability section. And all the way through the policy, the same pattern occurs. So the next point I'd like to go to is product liability, which is very important. Claims made against you by others. You'll notice that this is very similar to product liability, basically structured the same way. It's for personal injury or death for property damage caused, in this instance, by a product. And then the next sentence says, with which you have dealt with in various ways, and then in the conduct of your business. If you've had any involvement with a product, you have liability after it has left your premises. So if you have been involved with the manufacturing or the construction, the alteration, if product is repaired or serviced or treated or sold or supplied or distributed by you, you basically may be brought into an action for product liability. But what does product liability actually cover, or what does it not cover? So it doesn't cover a claim from a purchaser of your product in circumstances where that claim arises because the product, merely because it doesn't function in the way that it should, the required quality, or fails to perform to its intended function. All it does, it will cover the costs if that failure results in physical injury or property loss. That's what's covered, not an economic loss. Economic loss or financial loss means you have lost money because you've been out of action, or your businesses hasn't been able, right? That's financial loss. All public product liability does is will pay for the costs of injury or property loss that occurs out of the sale of those property. It's the physical injury or the actual property damage, the cost of repair or the cost of medical help, not the resulting loss. And with that, I will go to professional indemnity on the right-hand side. And you'll notice that, as I stated, it's for claims against you made by a client. And there's a reason why I think, until I get to know some of the businesses better in the RPA, if there's interest, I think there may be reason for some members to take out professional indemnity insurance in the manufacture of certain products aimed for dogs or something with a certain formulation. You might have consultants that tell you what's required or check it, but you're still on the hook ultimately. They'll sue you as the supplier. You might have a counterclaim against professionals that guided you, but I think it is arguably of relevance to members. So it covers professional negligence or errors made in the work that you've completed for your client. I said pursuant to an agreement. It's inherent that you've got to have some kind of agreement, and preferably a written agreement. That's the key. Spelling out what it is that you're going to give them advice for, regardless of whether the fee is paid. And that comes out of left field, that comment, whilst acting in the performance of your professional occupation. So there are two buckets to this. The classic professions, engineers, lawyers, and accountants, where professional standards legislation applies. Generally, the professional associations control that whole place tightly, like controlling, the issuance of a public practice certificate, like as a chartered accountant. If you withhold a public practice certificate, you can't practice. Medical practitioners not getting a practice license, so on. So those associations act in concert with with legislators. They set up insurance schemes for professional indemnity, and they have the ability to negotiate because they negotiate en masse. They set up schemes and they get limits for the profession. So if you deal with a lawyer, you'll see there it's got a member of the Professional Standards Association and their liability is capped. They do that. They work with the government to get these. They work hand in glove, basically, to set that. It suits both parties. And then the other bucket is the non-professionals. Now, this is really interesting in relation to the IPA. So you need not be one of those the traditional professionals. There's another category called occupational professional indemnity, which the law looks at. You know, that's financial advisors, insurance brokers. Like if you've got an Australian financial services license, you've got that because the corporations law says you must have it. But that's not the traditional professionals. And to take it further, in the second category of occupational professionals, it's basically anyone who has an occupation that either does work of a skilled nature or according to a recognized discipline with an accepted system of work, or is engaged to provide specialist advice upon which your client is entitled to place reliance. So it's clear that, you know, plumbers and electricians and all of that are starting to fall into these categories now. It's to give you an example, I received a call for a bricklayer wanting professional indemnity. It's like it's utter chaos and madness in Australia in litigation space, and the insurance professional group working group, I think it said that per capita, Australia is now more litigious than anywhere in the world, more litigious than the state of New York per capita, which is unbelievable. So just a little bit of insight. In general, for liability insurance, the insured must prove the circumstances and the amount of the third-party loss that's being claimed, its liability to the third party and the terms of the insurance contract, and that the insurance contract actually responds to its liability to the third party. So there are very special circumstances in which you will have legal liability. That's why it's important to note the term legal liability as opposed to straight liability. Which takes us to the cyber insurance policy. So why am I introducing this? Because there's a lot happening right now in Australia with this, and it's coming to a place near you soon, and I'll explain why. And many people don't know much about the product or the landscape in cyber, and so I hope to add a little bit of insight into that. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an IT consultant, I'm a general insurance broker, and I can tell you about the cyber insurance product, what it is covered, what it's designed for, and how it can help you. But when you look at the covers that's offered in the contract, that gives you a clue as to what's happening out there in the world, what the risks are. Quickly, just want to go through some misconceptions, perhaps in the SME space, small to medium enterprise. People say, well, I don't hold valuable data, don't transact online as a matter of course. My data is safe in the cloud. My IT consultants will handle this. Our IT systems, spend a lot of time and energy, can't be breached. Now, basically, if you're in business as a member of IPA, basically you're using the internet, you're using email, their website, the computer programs in place, storing information. I have talking points on the slide here to counter all of those misconceptions. I've got that information from experts, underwriting agencies for cyber. We do lots of webinars and CPD conferences and all that. It's not important for this conversation. What I'm trying to do is now just quickly set the scene for how serious this possibly is for members. Basically, 1 out of 3 Australians have had a cyber event in the last 12 months. This is National Australia University. It demonstrates the scale of the problem. There are now government departments with dedicated resources to address cyber. I'll show you that quickly. Firms of lawyers are mushing up with specialized divisions. It's huge. If you have, when we do cyber webinars online as insurers, large insurance companies are now getting in and offering product. New insurance underwriting agencies are getting up. There's new product, and the government is throwing money in place. And most importantly, is their statute in place. So this is straight from the government website, cyber.gov.au, and there it spells it out in black and white. Cyber incident to an SME can, you can suffer business continuity, downtime, lost productivity, loss of reputational, your suppliers and counterparties, forensic investigation, ultimately leading to the requirement to report your cyber breach. So what I can get from preparing for the seminar, and I only found out about legislation I'll talk about shortly, about 2 weeks ago at a CPD conference for our network. So two sides to this, two buckets. An SME, small little or medium enterprise, suffers a cyber event. You'll shortly see what the covers and risk exposures are. The second one is where a larger firm is, suffers a cyber event. I think it's safe to say that the assumption is, or that the eligible data breaches are applying to the larger corporations. But wait, it gets better. There's more to come. So please note, you suffer a loss in both instances, whether you're a larger business or a smaller one. One is where the government wants to know about it, and it's more complex because the stakes are you have to, by law, notify the privacy commissioner. It's not better, it's just less bad. We know that cyber is important enough to have specific statute in place. There's an information commission in place, and if you cyber event, it is a notifiable event. If you want an analogy, that's like having a rabies outbreak on your farm or some other animal notifiable event. Those that are farmers will know that I'm talking about. It's a big deal, right? Either way, it's a bad outcome for you. And people, the most problem is you know what to do and where to turn to. This is the legislation, just very briefly. I found out of this recently. This bill is in Parliament. They want to. It's been in during COVID. It's been on the table, for 2 years. But now they want to change it. And what they're changing it to is really to bring that legislation down from a threshold of 3 million turnover, doing away with it, and it applies to all businesses. If that happens, and I am told that they hope to sign that bill before the end of this year. If that happens, that could be a game changer. Everyone has to get cyber, and cyber is absolutely mushrooming. One underwriting agency that I spoke at the conference have sold more insurance policies in 12 months than in 1 month than the previous 12 months. It's nuts. So now I just want to talk about the actual product itself and what it can do for you. So there is a breakdown of a typical product, and it shows part A, losses to your business. That is a defined events type of cover. It basically just says it's a loss of revenue type of cover. That's the protection that you get, that payout for loss of revenue that's happened. And technically, it says if a cyber event happens, or if a preventative shutdown is forced upon you, then we will pay you this preventative shutdown license allowance. These are things like a cyber event means crimeware, cyber espionage, cyber extortion, denial of service, hacking, insider and privileged misuse, that's with staff, your own staff. And again, miscellaneous errors, unintentional actions that directly compromise an attribute of your IT infrastructure. Privacy errors, again, of your employees, payment card skimming, physical theft and loss where an item of your IT infrastructure is missing or fails, and ends up in the hands of a third party or the public, whether through misplacement or malice. It carries on, web app attacks, point of sale intrusion, and so on. But basically, it covers the reduction in revenue that your business incurs if you have a cyber event. This is what we spoke about a bit earlier. And also any increased costs that you have to pay to avoid a reduction in revenue. So call that, kind of a business interruption cover. It's not really, but it's a cost cover, increased cost and a revenue protection cover. Part B says we'll pay you for your legal liability. That is to third parties. So we're obviously dealing with a third party cover because of multimedia injury or a cyber event that happens in your business but causes loss to others. Multimedia injury means libel, slander, infringement of trademarks, the name issues, non-conformance with requirements of the disability discrimination, inadvertent disclosure of personal information that arises or is occasioned through your website content or your social media presence or other online mediums. Turning to part C and D, again, if there's a cyber event in your business, they'll pay extra costs called event response costs. There are a lot of other costs that you suffer when you suffer a cyber event. It's cyber extortion costs, your data securing costs, restoration costs, credit and ID monitoring. If other people have got, if you've lost data that's been exfiltrated, huge amount of expenses. And Section D is optional. That's the business, it's called contingent business interruption. In this case, we focused on defined events, either at your premises or elsewhere. But this is for different types of events. It's for a different business, someone else's business, that is a supplier to you. And the event causes loss to your business. What the events are: supply outage or system failure at your supplier's premises. So a supply outage just means an interruption to your business from a cyber outage, a cyber event at your external supplier's business. And a system failure means interruption to your business from an outage of your IT infrastructure. And that takes us just to something about some helpful tips. I'm not an IT expert. I can mess up any IT system, but I've got some information from underwriting agencies. I'll go through them very quickly. Cyber literacy, education of your own your business and the operators. Password protection, everything. Keep your software up to date. Secure and hide your Wi-Fi. Have information security in place. Back up your data. Have a business continuity plan. And ensure that you have appropriate or adequate insurance. Information is available. ACCC has a digital information service, and the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner also has information. That's their landing page. Members can send me an email. I can send some of the copies of those documents. And that is the end. Open for some more questions.
Thank you, Martin. That was particularly at cyber part, super interesting. Also got a lot out of the difference between liability and indemnity, and of course that rather alarming part about having contents insurance as well for the umbrella in the eye situation. Again, a loss of eyes. It seems to be common for you. There's a couple of people that have just let me know that they'll watch the end of the recording but had to jump off. So no questions from the audience, and I'm just cognizant that we have now taken over an hour of your time.
Yes.
So,
and I also don't have any notes to my cheat sheet notes, and I did that rapidly this afternoon.
Oh, they're amazing, those questions. Yeah. I think maybe just the one question I was particularly interested in is what is the most common mistake you see from small and medium businesses when it comes to insurance?
Look, well, I'll answer the sort of two components, because you answered, there were two sort of separate questions but related. In my humble opinion, top of the list is developing a more mature in-house risk culture before you even get to insurance. I have a deep interest in that, and I in the experience that I've had in the industry, it's becoming clear to me that rates are going up everywhere. Insurance is becoming so expensive, and underwriters are becoming much more discerning. Better to start developing some risk management protocols. And by the way, I might just add my experience in setting up a public not-for-profit farmers mutual fund. We had a lot of cotton insurers that were the best farmers in Australia. They were saying, we're not interested in claiming for a cracked windscreen, right? We're just not interested in that. So the whole idea was to set up a group, like the IPA members setting up a separate captive, but that's a long way down the track. But in concept, the idea that I'm trying to say is like-minded individuals that want to set up best practice as a group to manage their business, to reduce the cost of insurance by reducing the propensity to claim as a result of increased awareness of risk and knowledge and understanding of how to assess and recognize those risks, and looking at their station in life, the maturity of the business. Is it a startup? What's the size of your balance sheet? And saying, what can I or can't I accommodate as a risk? Talk in terms of, setting higher excesses and the retentions, and working through the broker that can guide you through all of that. And if you're not find a broker that can talk you through and work with the broker. That takes me to the second half of your question. And it is businesses that phone us up, small business, larger business, and engaging with the broker in a manner that affords greater engagement and respect for the insurance process, the contracts, and what it can do for you, both downside and upside. Because if you want to buy cheap insurance, or if your instruction to your broker is find the cheapest policy, you'll get the cheapest cover. And if I may just use an example, when I was running the farm portfolio at Allianz, we had a horse riding claim, a 16-year-old schoolgirl on a small little hobby farm owned by a trucking contractor whose main business was trucking and just had some acreage and a horse. And a 16-year-old schoolgirl had a horse riding accident on his farm. She's a tetraplegic. She's lying, may still well be now, or now she'll probably be out of hospital by now, being fed by a tube. I broke my neck when I was, young, and I know what my parents went through, and that was a huge impact on me. So I set about straight away changing the farm pack policy to cater better for that. The point of the whole discussion is, when I say suffered, I mean I had to go through the process of working with legal counsel, trying to, through arbitration, to get some cover for this family, for this poor girl. There was zero cover. And the reason for that was because this trucking guy told an agent to find the cheapest cover because the bank wants cover for his mortgage. And I wonder what goes through his head when you think of that family and that 16-year-old schoolgirl lying as a tetraplegic. I'm sorry I'm getting a bit emotional, but I'm just trying to say, when you treat insurance in that fashion, something bad could happen to you. So the biggest thing I think mistakes farmers make is not giving your insurance and the person you're dealing with and the advice you're getting the engagement that it requires, that it warrants.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Well, thank you. That is a good tip, because it's often a really long phone call, right, with your insurance agents, and they ask questions you don't always know the answer to. So I can see why you'd fall into that trap, but your story is very
poignant.
Very, very poignant indeed. And indeed your entire presentation. I know there'll be a few people watching this online, and if they want to reach out to you, Martin, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, I guess the best way is, well, I'm on LinkedIn and OmniSure. There's a lot of, it's just I think that ESG in an ag condition, that's you can look me up on OmniSure, and you'll see under the blog quite a lot of information. But in relation to IPA members, I think questions about product liability, but I do hope that the kernel, the essence of the difference between professional indemnity, product liability, public liability, and knowing that the third-party covers are what are going to put an end to your business.
Yeah.
Everyone can handle a motor car, one of your utes getting taken out. But if on your farm, the next door neighbors ask if their 21-year-old son can have a bucks and spinsters and bucks party on your smaller holding, and those kids are having a party at 12 a.m. and one of the guys drives a forklift into the shed, and this is another life policy, stands on the forks, which has got fruit in a box, and raises him up 15 foot into the air, and he falls off and breaks his neck, another tetraplegic in the farm pack policy. You're going to have problems, right? It's going to put you right out of business if you don't have appropriate cover. So yeah, it's the liability side that is the most complex, and you need good advice for, and choose the right policy, and choosing the cover type under property, then the basis of settlement. You insure for $50,000. What's your expectation when the claim arises? If you've paid premium for a sum insured for $50,000, but you've insured for $12,000, you're gonna have an ugly discussion.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's been great. I hope it's been of benefit. And
yeah, and look, I just for everyone watching later on, I just really wanted to highlight the work you put into this, and having someone with a farming background to actually take the time to present to us and really get to know what our members are doing is really valuable. So thank you for the hours and hours you put into this presentation and the research you did, and for talking to us with such a great background. So thank you very much, Martin. Thanks. And I hope we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks, Alison. Bye.
Bye.